Hey everybody, it's Retro DM Ray back with you again for another video today. I wanted to cover a topic. This is going to be a little bit of an issue here. I'm going to cover one today and then maybe one tomorrow, both of which might be an issue for some new system gamers. But if you look back in my video files for my channel, you'll see some stuff about going back to basics and things that I think kind of broke or changed the game significantly. For myself, I know personally, and I think for many others too, in changing it away from original design and play style of old school versus coming towards the new school, and the way that the game is played in general, and that the reasons behind the way it was, the way it was. And I recently have picked up some back issues of the Best of Dragon magazine because I've watched several videos of different people, some of which say they're old school gamers or used to be and aren't anymore, or whatever the case might be, talking about or complaining about various different things, or not having real origins for the history of things that they're saying about old school gaming, and how it's played. And so I wanted to clear up one particular thing. I want to hear from the man who created the game, along with Dave Arneson. I want to hear Gary Gygax and his opinion about some of these things. And it just so happens that in this Best of Dragon Volume 2, they printed an article from Gary written in the September 1979, number 29 issue of Dragon Magazine that I think stands out to me, that I just want to read through this article with you. And what we're talking about is if you play 5th edition, you play Pathfinder 2nd edition, even Pathfinder 1st edition, or some other systems, there's various different ones out there, you'll run into just this massive, kitchen sink or just massive, like throw it all in a pot, kind of a soup of racial types that you can choose from. And the popularity of all of that, and just the whole gamut of all kinds of, like he says here, crossbreeds in this article, that you can choose from, character races you can play, and then the things that they can achieve, and just all that kind of stuff that diverts away from the original intended creation of old school D&D, going back all the way to 1979 and even before, when Gary was creating it in first edition Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, coming from OD&D and then working its way forward into that. And so I'm going to read this article. The article here is entitled Humans and Hybrids. And this is what Gary has to say about this idea of just having a plethora of all kinds of racial types you could choose from, and just all of that kind of mess of stuff. He says, of late, I have seen several different treatments of half-ogres, and the suggestion that this type of creature is a viable and worthwhile racial type for player characters has thus gained some small popularity. This subject also touches upon another closely related matter, the whole gamut of crossbreeds, which could possibly be included in the AD&D game. Dungeon masters must be apprised of the potential can of worms they will be opening by allowing these mixtures in their campaigns. The character races in the AD&D system were selected with care. They give variety of approach, but any player selecting a non-human or part or demi-human character does not have any real advantage. True, some of these racial types do give short-term advantages to the players who choose them, but in the long run, these same characters are at an equal disadvantage when compared to human characters with the same number of experience points. This was, in fact, designed into the game. So let me stop there. Anybody who would claim or think and say that just came along from because Gary didn't want that in his personal game, so he put it in the game, or it just never showed up until later, or all this kind of mess of nonsense about that, he clears that up when he says it was designed into the game, the few racial type selections that you have in the first edition Advanced Dungeons & Dragons Player's Handbook. Okay. The variety of approach makes role selection more interesting. Players must weigh advantages and disadvantages carefully before opting for character race, human or otherwise. It is in vogue in some campaigns to remove restrictions on demi-humans, or at least to relax them somewhat. While this might make the DM popular for a time with those participants, with dwarven fighters of high level or elven wizards of vast power, It will eventually consign the campaign as a whole to one in which the only races will be non-human. Dwarves, elves, et al. Will have all the advantages and no real disadvantages, so the majority of players will select these races, and humankind will disappear from the realm of player character types. This bears upon various hybrid racial types as well. In designing the advanced Dungeons & Dragons game, I considered the possible racial mixtures. Should half-dwarves, half-gnomes, or half-halflings, and is a half-halfling a quarterling perchance, be allowed? How about dwarf-elf, dwarf-gnome, dwarf-halfling, elf-gnome, elf-halfling, or gnome-halfling crossbreeds? Then there are tri-racial mixtures. Those involving humans and orcs add still more confounding factors. And now somebody decided that ogres could cross with humans? Could they cross with elves also? How about hill giants interbreeding with humans? With elves, with ogres, with ettins? Why leave out goblins, hobgoblins, and bugbears? Because of the potential for absolute madness in the game, I included only the half-elf, hoping that the rest would not arise to plague the placid waters of racial selection. But it is apparent that that is not meant to be. Consider the various factors which must be taken into account when designing a race for game purposes. Remember that last part. This is first and foremost a game. Races, just as with classes, must be in relative balance with each other as well as with the game as a whole. Setting this balance is a difficult and delicate operation. So we have 1. Character class limits due to race. 2. Level limits due to race. 3. Ability adjustments due to race. 4. Racial maximums and minimums in abilities. 5. Racial preferences, and 6. Special characteristics of racial types, i.e. magic resistance, saving throws, combat versus specific monsters, visual and other sense capabilities, and sixth sense, quote-unquote, or innate skill capabilities such as detection of grades or underground conditions, etc. If these 6 factors are considered only as single entities, not as multifaceted ones, there's still plenty of work to do in setting up even a single additional character race, for each must be meshed with and balanced against all other such races. Now, consider the possible crossbreeds and multiply your DMing woes by 1,000. As surely as you allow a single player to select a non-standard hybrid, another will come along asking for some special crossbreed, which he or she envisions to be, quote-unquote, logical, meaningful, and fun to play, parentheses, read advantageous for the player in question, close parentheses. Pixie storm giant half-breeds would not be impossible. For those who doubt the last claim, consider a lecherous male pixie equipped with several growth potions and a love filter. And when all is said and done, an AD&D game is fantasy. Then we skip forward past the half-ogre entry here. And then he said, it is important to reiterate that hybrids not shown in AD&D players' handbooks should be generally rejected in the well-run campaign. The device is that of players seeking to gain some advantage for themselves by choosing a racial mixture which they believe will have greater advantages with fewer drawbacks than those of the character races given in the official AD&D rules. If exceptions are to be made, be certain that you, the DM, consider each thoroughly prior to admitting it into your campaign milieu. Each exception must be detailed as was done for the half-ogre above. Do so privately, and if after listing its parameters you find that the hybrid is unacceptable, disallow its use. Or go back and restructure the characteristics, being careful to use the examples in the player's handbook as a guide. Then and only then should a player be allowed to have such a hybrid racial type to choose from. Lastly, if hereafter many of your participants suddenly express a desire to start characters of this particular racial mixture, you can pretty well rely upon the fact that you blew it. All of this will certainly lead to the question, why is it that the human race is so favored in the AD&D rule system? There's no question that human characters have an advantage on all others in the long run, even considering the generally unlimited potential for non-human thieves. The bias was placed in the game on the assumption that the vast majority of campaign milieu would be based on human-dominated worlds. Therefore, humans must have some sort of edge. As human adaptability is undoubted and human capabilities deemed vast by this writer, it has seemed to follow that allowing them the full range of possibilities was the best answer. Thus, humans are found in all alignments, in all professions, and so on. The weakest are very weak, the strongest very strong. The human race plumbs the depths and soars to the heights. In the AD&D world, as in the real world, humankind will certainly attain greatness and domination if it doesn't destroy itself first through warfare and strife within its own race. So I just wanted to read that article to you. The emphasis that he places here on how this was designed into the game, incredibly important. The emphasis he places here on the fact that a lot of times it's advantageous for the player in question to want to mix and match all of these different racial choices like that. There are some games who give a plethora of racial choices and then flatten all the curves out. So it really doesn't matter what you're playing. That's just a skin you put on something and everything functions the same. I think you might know the systems that I'm particularly talking about that do that. So there is that consideration. There is a consideration that you're going to multiply your woes as a DM by 1,000-fold if you allow this kind of stuff like that. Okay? I think there's also, like he says, something to be said about the fact that not only are they trying to gain some advantage or some greater advantage, but that you're going to have to go through all the work and go back and recreate that, talk with your player or players about that, and then make sure that they're not just wanting to do that so the whole party can just choose to be all of that and take away the humanocentric emphases and aspects of the way in which the game was originally intended and created. Now, again, I know this is a controversial thing, going to set some people off, I'm certain. These are just not only my opinions, but this is what Gary wrote. This was his opinion, and he created the game along with Dave Arneson. And this is the way I like to run the game. That's why I don't remove level limits. That's why I keep those restrictions in place. So if you want to play those races, sure, have fun playing them, but know that humans are always going to outpace you no matter what it is you choose. I think that's important because, especially like for me, if I run a game in Greyhawk, that's a humanocentric campaign setting. That's the way it was originally written, the way it was intended, the best way that it's to be played, in my opinion. If your games don't run like that and you can do all of this and have fun with that and none of these things bother you, that's cool. What I wanted to stop was hearing videos constantly about how level limits suck and they weren't really intended and there really wasn't an intended balance and there really was just because he didn't like that himself personally and all this other kind of stuff. So I just wanted to read that article and kind of just cover that. And I'll be interested to hear your comments and add more to this if you want to add more to the conversation. Again, it's always a G-rated channel, and we're not going to have any mess. We're not going to argue back and forth. We're not going to have problems. So post that stuff, and I'll just delete it. I'll just tell you that up front. I won't do back and forth stuff with you with that. But if you want to have good, genuine discussion, you want to provide more things for the conversation. You want to correct in something that I said where I was a little off about that. Cool. Hard to correct what Gary had to say since I just read that word for word. But if you need to correct something that I had to say, that's cool. Comment how you do this or don't do this in your games. My game is a hybrid game with my family of first edition, and then I move forward into Unearthed Arcana a little bit and into second edition. Second edition because my comfort level of old school is I ran second edition predominantly for the absolute longest amount of time from the moment that it hit the shelves. So that's why I tend to run that as my baseline because that's just what I'm more comfortable with. But I pull way back from that using a lot of first edition and even some basic or Beck-Me stuff kind of pulled into that to kind of give it that a little bit better of alignment back towards first edition without the weightiness of the craziness of first edition attack matrices and first edition weighty kind of round segment initiative divisions and surprise segment initiative divisions and kind of some of those clunky things that I don't really care for just for crunching purposes. So again, leave a comment, leave some thoughts about this or whatever. I just thought I'd post another one today when I was reading this article. Thought it was really, really cool. The next one I'm going to cover is an article called Books Are Books and Games Are Games. So that's going to focus on talking about what is role playing as far as a narrative that you're reading about versus a story that you're being a participating player in. Because there's some videos out there where there's a back and forth between, yeah, this is this and that is that, and I like to play like I'm playing in a novel and run my games like it's a novel, and in comparison to old school, I just find that odd. And that's fifth edition today, right? It's just an odd kind of, let's just play out this grand overarching Avengers style novel with all of our characters and develop this novelization of play. And that's just not something I care for. So I'm going to read that article to you next time and kind of talk about some of that stuff. Um, Again, Gary's writing again. I just kind of really like reading this kind of stuff. So if you like it too, give me a thumbs up, like, subscribe, share, pass it all around. Again, join in the conversation. I'd appreciate that. And take a look at the video description again for ways to support the channel. I appreciate that. And we will talk to you again next time. Have some great old school games. Later.